Hi, friends. Thank you so much. Phil and Marcia, I actually believe I remember you as early as high school, which I was more of a secret poet back then, but I think that's true. So thank you so much for having me today. And I'm so excited to be reading in the legacy of Jackson Wheeler and to be here with you all. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land in which I'm currently reading is and breathing and creating is my parents' house in Newbury Park, where I'm spring breaking for a change of scenery. And that is the original and traditional territory of the Chumash people. And that no matter where each of us is, where all of us is, many of us in Ventura County, are currently living, resisting, and creating, we are on native land. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to live and work in these homelands. And before elevating my own voice, I would like to amplify and celebrate a voice of Asian American literary excellence, a poet I'm very fond of, Franny Choi. We used our words, we used what words we had, by Franny Choi. We used our words, we used what words we had to weld, what words we had wielded, kneeled, we knelt, and wept. We wrung the wet, the sweat. We racked our lips. We rang for words toward. Off sleep, the warn, to want ourselves, to want the earth. We mouthed it, wound our vowels until it fit. In fits, the earth we mounted, roused and rocked. We harped, we yawned, and tried to yawp, and tried to fix, affixed, we facted, felt. We fattened, fanfared, anthemed, hammered, felt. The words worth stagnate, snap in half in heat. The wane, the melt, the words we'd hoarded, halved, and wholly porous. Meanwhile, tide still tide, and we still washed for sounds to mark and marked. Thank you. And thank you to Franny Choi. Okay, so I'm going to read a few poems this evening from my manuscript that Marcia is so kind to say that it's circulating. I need to actually make good on that and make the thing circulate, but I am working up the courage. And I will read a few poems from there. As some of you might be familiar with, I write a lot about grief, which has only become more of a commitment as we are as a nation entering into and residing in a stage, a phase of great bereavement in the wake of the pandemic, of the COVID-19 crisis. And so a lot of these poems, the grief, as I've known it, started maybe a year before the pandemic, but has only sort of like spiraled in on itself. So buckle up, because there's a lot of grief poems in this collection. But I also hope, my hope is that in talking about grief and writing about grief, that's the only way we can heal and free ourselves if we reside in that moment. The first night of no one. I went to Joshua Tree, the nightfall never so clear on its points. Thought I could drop my head back enough to see my pretending, cradled in Orion's belt, cupped in Big Dipper, enough for me to drink, exhaled, inhaled, my own nebula. I don't know where God is, but I believed in you, not like a god, just like a dust road still traceable. But the stars stole the map right out of my mouth. Thank you. Oh, I love that we can join together. That I do miss, like, there's something that life could have never prepared me for, which is like moving the Word document in front of and then like pulling it out to see my lovely audience. So I have you all in gallery. So thank you so much for like being here and being so encouraging. The second one, I began to write this last summer after my dear uncle, who was like a second father to me, my Theo Mike, after he passed, I began to write just like a series of poems called Grief Logic. And I think I have about 20 of them, and most of them are completely incomprehensible, as grief might be, but a couple of them are, they make some sense at this time. And so some of the poems that I'll read in there are titled Grief Logic. Grief Logic number 2. When Serafin died, the aire in the living room went out, remember? And it was the same when Mike left that morning. The fridge rattled out of warranty, too young, just like him, melted from the inside, the first hot day of summer. I tried to save us, the gallina y carne pulled from the freezer, at least in tailgate coolers, borrowed from Tiati, the edges of the ice rounding, even as I scooped it out with my bare hands, burning, raw, dripping. I tried my best to preserve what we had saved, pero no sirve. The warming earth did not stop for me. And thank you. This one is called Checking for Snakes, and it was written after I had the actually pleasure and privilege of going to the community of writers. Going to the community of writers. It was actually virtual last summer, but I made my own little retreat by coming back here to Newbury Park, and I'd log into Zoom every morning, and then I would go for a hike in the trails of the Santa Monica Mountains. So this is a poem that was written over there, and many of you probably know that spot. Checking for Snakes, Pandemic Hike 2020. The native digger bees are nesting, which means screw driving their soft bodies into the dirt, inventing porosity. Someone has created for them a boundary inside the footpath, a circle of odd rocks flanked with 2 plastic cones, Sharpie markered. Native bee colony. We don't sting. Be kind. I want to meditate in the human kindness that advocates for the bees. I want to focus on the purple heads of sagebrush rocketing towards the sky, the fillet of green trees through the dry chaparral grass. That looks like God's color theory, 5 different ways to know green. I'm trying so hard to delight in nature. I don't know if I believe in God, but I do remember a colonized world that has left me to see the trees as the only recipients of water in their neighborhood. That white sage is being snatched by white influencers who want to cleanse the space they take up. And the native bees, if they don't sting, what is it about the human being that wants to kill them, that needs a sign and pun to stop? feeling righteous in my appreciation of nature on her terms. I got poet lost on the trail, which is to say, not geographically lost, but spiritually, floating in the idea of sweet bees, the scrape of clouds, painting blades smashed across the good blue sky, buzzing in something that looked like joy. Oh, today's fresh mustard. Oh, ombre lantana, feeding butterflies, cream petals, and even the prickly pear, plumper than the year before, the year that taketh, the year that gave us rain. Until a rattlesnake slithered across my path, and I firecrackered from the earth, never so distant from the ground, with my own two legs in cardiac contract, adrenaline order, though I am just visiting, though I pride myself on being kind, I am ready to defend my life. And that was a real thing that happened. I was hiking and a rattlesnake just came across my path and my soul left my body. I just like flew into the sky, amazed I had made it. Okay. This next poem is called We All Agree to Hear Your Laugh in the Air at the News of the Toilet Paper Shortage. And I wrote this thinking about my abuelito, who is my grandfather. I was very close with him. He passed away a year before the pandemic started. But I found myself, and I wonder, I'd be so curious to hear in the chat if you have had this experience. Like I thought I was kind of weird, but I'm sure that others have had it, where you're like, if you were recently bereaved before the pandemic, like wondering about people in your life and who have passed and how they might have reacted to what's going on now, like what they would have said, what guidance they would have given you. And I couldn't help to think about my abuelito, who like wouldn't have listened and wouldn't have stayed in and would have been like, what are you talking about? Like I have places to go, you know? And so I wrote this poem thinking about that and like the anxiety of worrying about somebody and their safety who isn't even here anymore. We all agree to hear your laugh in the air at the news of the toilet paper shortage. On Channel 4, our city, where there is suddenly no Charmin, no Kirkland, no Purell, Si, Vaporu, no Crystal Geyser in gallons, only Arrowhead, the last water on earth that tastes like dirt. Ay caray, you would say, as you tried to leave the house to see your friends at the grocery checkouts, the Trader Joe's, the Vons, the Food for Less, for California garlic. Hito, no, los viejitos tienen que quedar en la casa. I worry about you being out there in the public air. You're not even here. You were so alive the day you died, viejito. Today, Michelangelo is at the Getty, and no one can see him, even with all their extra time, or your favorite Rembrandt at LACMA, torn down under construction since you left anyway. Yes, I am home from school, reading and watching too many pendejadas on Netflix, but staying inside, only leaving to deliver groceries to Ita and Elizabeth, all of us with immune systems, que sufriendo since you left, more vulnerable than ever. But we keep each other, and some of us keep God. You might have patriarched in overdrive, buying our groceries, or maybe you would have disappeared, hours in the cave of your records, compliant in meditation with sus canciones. It's hard to say where we would be now, hard to know where any of us would be, without this enfermedad en el aire today. The air quality in Los Angeles is the cleanest in the world, even over your barrio, where the city forgets your neighbors, who are now called essential, still going to work, so everyone else can stay at home. Hundreds of new lungs soaked in pneumonia by each 5 p.m. news. All this aspiration for such clean air. Thank you. This is a poem that I wrote after my abuelito passed away, and my little cousins, who were 5 and 6 at the time, came to me and asked me what happened to him. And if you've ever been confronted with that question from a young person, even if you have your own understanding of, whatever you've made of it, what understands when that happens, to have to explain it to somebody, to have to produce that knowledge, can be really well, it wasn't overwhelming. It was just, it gave me pause, and I was like, what do I say? So this is a poem that was written out of that. Living room. When my 6-year-old cousins ask me, where is he? I try to define everything about a God you didn't believe in until the hospital room slipped out. You begged, Mommy, Mommy, are you there? Took communion from the priest. The next time his voice filled the room. I can't hold it against you. There are times I sink into a spilled drink of my own grieving, stucco beside my bed, becoming scratch, phosphor, chalk, everything suddenly no me importa. I don't know where life is, because breaths seem to come and go like the lottery we watched, get called out and go unclaimed. Day after day, the week after your death, which was spent trying to make sure your love was eating condolence gorditas and turning off the World Series to pray the rosary, only to switch it back once the silence of living rooms twined made us sweat. I helped M and S write homework sentences on the soft cobija. In the other room, they ask, could we write you a letter? I try to define everything about a God I don't talk to, but I pretend for long enough to sit next to your love, who never got to say goodbye. What kind of God cuts a telephone line like that to such a well-paying customer? I learned to pray the rosary in Spanish, even though I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know how else to keep the living room from collapsing. Salas means living rooms, plural, and we have cinder blocked into many salas, some littered with used tissues, hived skin, others roped off, velvet laced, dusty doilies. I don't know where God is, but I pretend to know your forwarding address. My cousins ask me about the letter. I tell them you can't write back because your mailbox is now everywhere. Like when they're on the playground feeling lonely or feeling weird on the bus, they accept this logic from me, ask me to retell it, and I say yes to this forming of a room, and yes to watching the daily misa on closed circuit television weeknights at 5 p.m. with your love, and yes to believing in birds, wind, phantom doors, shaking bed frames, for everyone who needs me to say, I see it. Yes, I see it too. Thank you. Okay. I have just about 3 more poems for you. This poem I wrote is another grief logic poem, and I wrote it. So my Theo passed away, not of COVID this summer, but his death was definitely hastened by the circumstances of COVID upon the hospital system. We weren't able to visit him or see him or really like get in touch with anybody or advocate. So this is just kind of writing in the agony of that. Grief logic number 6. Theo, there is no holding here if you are trying to stay. So this, our last closeness at the door of history, does not matter. Your breath already thinned from the air. I kissed your brow after you left it, though I could not endanger anyone else with my touch, could not hold Thea's hand as your chest slowed to stop. And I birthed your death for all others, retching into the phone. We don't know what's inside of us, but somehow are trying to stay here together. I see you everywhere. I called your name in emergency. How is it the first time I kissed your forehead was the last? Thank you. You just have 2 more poems for you. This poem was written in the aftermath of reporting on the murder of Andres Guardado this summer, and just being outraged and confused by another brown body, another dark-skinned person murdered by police violence. Qualifying animacy. They killed another young man yesterday, this time at his job. When asked for comment, the police said, "No uniform. No one saw it." When asked for comment, his Theo promised, "I never saw him sad or angry." When I saw the news, my first rage and spit. He was a teen. He was a student. And look at how I qualified his breath with a resume. I thought of you and what mothers must collect as proof of the light that once warmed the body outside of their own. Birth times, brown eyes, el mundo detrás de pestañas largas, Dodgers hats faded blue, hair slicked in tres flores and mother's spit. Second grade, pictures tucked along the edges of the bedroom mirror, that you used to fall asleep on the sofa, a near-grown man dreaming in soft mijo peace, and someone still awake in the house draped you in tigre cobija as you drifted, that it crowned dandelion when you laughed. And this last poem, thank you, is called Reading by Norma y Cantu, and was written after hearing about a story about my abuelito after his passing that I hadn't known previously. So like learning something new about him after his death. Consider the cotton fields, the gauze mouth twist of a word forgotten, and next the drought, to have lost speech, jaw crammed with dirt and straw, damning the mouth. She said her face felt numb, como algodón. The words returned by her own digging, un milagro de Dios y la tierra. Cantu wrote of the cotton summers, the vast Texas plain of childhood between harvests. Clarita reads it to me. She must now say words out loud in order to understand them. She holds each word, its own bowl. And with this, we are not walking through Texas at all, but in Michoacan, her father's field. We tried to grow some, no era un buen clima. A few more sentences, we stop again, another place. I learned here my abuelito worked in the cotton fields of New Mexico. And here we are holding the stem of the cotton bud, seeing the blood in his child's hands, and now ours, 14 at the same time. The blood in my hands inks a ballot bubble, worries a sentence, clears the earth to plant yellow tulips. Hands clenched in fear or anxiety, but soft, softened with lotion, not calloused with hunger. He only spoke of the softer crops beside the sea. He lives in a moment he never handed me. It is not romantic. It is not beautiful. A few sentences, and now we're in Valparaíso, his old rancho. Los tíos would ask him where he wanted to be buried in the family plot in Zacatecas, and he would laugh at them. He would say, mi esposa, mis reinas son de este lado. ¿Quién va a traer las flores para mí por ahí? As if to say, leave my body where I brought it. Thank you so much.